Well, hello there. Welcome back to the channel. My name is James, and here at 20th and 21st Movies, we are about all things cinema. Well, today I'm excited to continue our Taste of Directors series. So for those who are not familiar with that series on this channel, we have a series here on 20th and 21st Movies called Taste of Directors series. And in this series, each month we'll turn the spotlight on a director. And we'll talk a little bit about the director, their background, their filmography, and then we'll choose 3 to 4 films from her or his filmography to give you a taste of what that director has to offer. And as I said before, many times, choosing 3 to 4 films is not going to give you the full depth and breadth of any director's work, especially a director who's been in the business for a long time. But we choose 3 or 4 films to just give a taste, just give a sampling of that director's work to give you an idea of the types of work that they've done and their contribution to the world of cinema. So a good example of that would be a director I recently discovered, and that would be director Marta Mészáros, Hungarian director Marta Mészáros, who was the director of the 1975 film Adoption that recently came out from the Criterion Collection. I did a review of that edition on this channel. So definitely check that out if you have not seen it. It's an excellent edition. She's an example of someone who's made multitude of films. I think in the special features, it said that she's done over 60 features. So if you choose 3 or 4 films from her filmography, you're only getting a small taste of what she's done. And that's the purpose of this Taste of Directors series. So this month, I am very excited because we are turning the spotlight on a director who is among my favorite directors. This is a director who has made some of the greatest films of all time, including one film in particular that is largely considered among the greatest that has ever been made. And coincidentally, that film happens to be the very first film that this director even did. So that makes the accomplishment even more phenomenal. But this is, of course, none other than Kenosha, Wisconsin born Orson Welles. So director Orson Welles, he was an actor, director, screenwriter, and producer, and he was born in Kenosha, Wisconsin in May of 1915. So almost 107 years ago, this great director was born. And I have to tell you, I love so many works from this director. What I really appreciated about Orson Welles is, and this is the case with a lot of directors, but he was a true auteur. He cut his chops in the theater. So he started off in the theater. He was an auteur. He loved to write screenplays and write plays. And he founded the Mercury Theater with John Houseman in 1937. So at the age of 21, 22, he founded this Mercury Theater company with John Houseman. And they started this partnership. Of course, at some point there was a rift that happened. And then somewhere down the line, years later, they were able to reconcile. But he and John Houseman started out very early on in 1937 with this Mercury Theater. And then in 1938, Orson Welles gained fame with a famous radio presentation. So he did a radio presentation of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds. And that radio broadcast in 1938 caused a ton of hysteria. There were people who really believed that we were being invaded by Martians based on that broadcast. And so out of that broadcast and out of the controversy that came from that, he got the attention of the studios and he got his first opportunity to make his first feature film. And at that time, he got full creative control of, from the beginning of the shoot all the way to final production and final cut, if you would, final cut. He was given authority over Citizen Kane, his very first feature film. And this is the film from 1941 that is regarded by many as being one of the greatest films of all time. It is an absolutely extraordinary film, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. But that was his first feature film. And of course, he then went on to direct over 60 films, including feature films, shorts, and TV programs. So Orson Welles is one of those great auteurs in cinema that I greatly admire, and I love so many of his films. One of the things that I think highlights his career it is sort of tragic in the sense that there was a bit of friction between Orson Welles and the studio. Like there was a little bit of a butting of the heads that caused some of his works to be shortchanged, because what ended up happening is sometimes the studios would have took control of his film and they would make changes. They would do reshoots, they would reshoot the ending, they would cut scenes and cut material and produce a cut of his film that was not what he originally intended. And that's happened on a number of Orson Welles' films. And there are many cases where a lot of the footage that he shot in his movies are now presumably forever lost, which I think is a tragedy and something that, you know, as you look at the career of Orson Welles, you recognize the brilliance that this man brought to cinema, but you also recognize in some ways the tragedy in the way that he was treated by the mainline studio system, and how the studio system kind of treated his works in some ways disrespectfully. But the good thing is we do have much of his works to enjoy, and these are some of the works that I want to highlight here in this Taste of Directors series. So Orson Welles, like I said, one of my favorite directors of all time. Let me know in the comments below where Orson Welles ranks for you amongst favorite directors, but he is definitely one of my favorites. But here are the 4 films that I'm going to feature in this Taste of Directors entry spotlight on Orson Welles. So the first film is 1941 Citizen Kane, amazing film. The second film is from 1942, the very following year, The Magnificent Ambersons. The third film is a film that got a recent Kino Lorber 4K, and I think is, when people do top 10 lists of top 10 media releases of 2022, I think this is gonna appear on some top 10 lists, and that is the 4K of Touch of Evil. Of course, this is the older Blu-ray edition from Universal, but Touch of Evil is an absolutely amazing film from Orson Welles. That is from 1958, and it stars Orson Welles along with Charlton Heston and Janet Leigh. And then the last film I'm going to feature in this Taste of Orson Welles films is a film from 1975, and it is Orson Welles' F for Fake. So these are the 4 films I am going to feature. So without any further ado, let's talk a little bit about Citizen Kane. So this is the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray combo of Citizen Kane that recently came out from the Criterion Collection. And this is Orson Welles' feature film debut. Of course, as I said before, he got full control from soup to nuts on the production of this film. And this film is known for being innovative in not necessarily inventing certain techniques of shooting scenes and framing shots. A lot of that innovative techniques have been used before, but Orson Welles had a way of combining these techniques in a way that became inventive, and he sort of put his own mark on these things, such as the way that he shot certain scenes in the sense of shooting very low with the camera low to the ground, and really making the central figure in the frame look more imposing, and really gave you a different view of the character. So he was really good about that, as well as employing different fades and transitions and other technical things that he would do. Very innovative filmmaker, and that is on full display in this film that's now over 80 years old, from 1941, Citizen Kane. Of course, it's about the story of Charles Foster Kane, a man who at a very young age came into a lot of money, was taken away from his family, and just the rise and fall of a very wealthy man who seemed to have everything in the world, but at the same time had very little. So it's a fascinating story that I highly recommend anyone to check out, because it is just one of the great films, one of the great stories ever put to film, and this is one of the great films that's ever been made. As I think about like my favorite films, as much as I love and appreciate this film and respect this film, Citizen Kane is not among my top 25 like favorite films, but it is a film that I have tremendous respect for, tremendous adoration for. And I absolutely love this film because it is a technical marvel and masterpiece, especially for the time that it was made. And it still holds up to this day. So it's a black and white film. This is an amazing addition from Criterion. This was my top favorite release of 2021, this 4K Ultra HD. And I picked it up from Barnes & Noble the day that it came out. Of course, these are the special features on the back here. Tremendous special features. This is a loaded, stacked edition. As you'll see from the special features, so many documentaries, interviews, the commentaries on here. This is a totally stacked to the brim edition and was my favorite single edition film release of last year of 2021, excuse me. So I can't say enough good things about Citizen Kane. Just an amazing movie. I still need to send in my request for the disc replacement for that Blu-ray disc 1. I haven't been in a hurry to do so because the reason I picked this up in the first place was for the 4K anyway. And I couldn't even see what was wrong with the Blu-ray when I watched it, and I popped it in again the other day and I still can't see what the issue is, but I'm still gonna go ahead and get that replacement, if no other reason than to get that, I think, $10 certificate as well. So I'll be taking advantage of that. But Citizen Kane, fantastic film. If you have not seen this, this is a great place to start for Orson Welles. And this is a great addition from Criterion, this 4K edition. Definitely check it out. We'll now move on to the Magnificent Ambersons. This is his sophomore effort, 1942. Of course, Citizen Kane was 1941. This was the following year. And this is another Criterion Collection edition. And this is a great film. This is a film that basically follows the story of the Ambersons, who were a successful, wealthy family in the Midwest, in Indianapolis, around the turn of the century. So around the 1920s or 30s, I think. And it just shows the rise and fall of this family. And this particular film has a very fascinating history in the sense of going back to what I was saying before about how the studio would mess with Orson Welles' work. And this is a classic, tragic example of that. If you look at this cover of this Criterion edition, you'll notice that the art seems incomplete. So this picture seems like it's incomplete, like around the edges, it's like not fully drawn in or what have you. And that is sort of indicative of the history of this film, in that the studio changed a lot about this film, including the ending. And the ending is very controversial in terms of what the studio presented as opposed to what Orson Welles' original vision for this film was. But this is the best presentation available for the film on this Criterion Collection edition. It is a 4K digital restoration of the remaining elements, and it represents the best presentation we have for the Ambersons. Now, I think there's been some articles about, some work to try to find the lost footage of this film. And that would be one of the great finds in cinema history if somehow, some way, someone's able to find those missing scenes and find a print that has something that closely resembles Orson Welles' intended vision for this film. That would be great to see. Not sure if it still exists because people think that those prints are gone, but this is a great example of how the studio interfered with Mr. Welles' work. But all in all, this is an amazing film. I highly recommend it. This is Spine 952 in the Criterion Collection. It's the Magnificent Ambersons, and I simply cannot say enough about this film. This is a great film. This to me is probably his greatest film, but this film is very, very much up there. And it employs a lot of the same camera and optical techniques that you'll see in Citizen Kane. It's the Magnificent Ambersons, highly recommended, 1942. Now we're gonna skip a decade and a half into the future and get into a film that I have recently revisited with this amazing Kino Lorber 4K Ultra HD, and that is Touch of Evil. So this is the film starring Charlton Heston, Janet Leigh, and Orson Welles, and I absolutely love this film. This is a film that has just a wonderful atmosphere. It's from 1958. It basically puts you in the town of Los Robles, which is across the border from the United States and Mexico, and you've got basically a murder that happens, and there's an investigation that gets underway that Charlton Heston is involved in. He's on the Mexico side of things. He plays Vargas. And then you've got Quinlan here, who's played by Orson Welles. He's a U.S. detective. And then you got Janet Leigh, who plays the wife of Vargas here. Just a great film, great script, great setting, and a wonderful atmosphere. And this Kino Lorber 4K Ultra HD, this film has never looked better. This Blu-ray edition also is phenomenal. Highly recommend this edition as well. And this is another example of the studios tampering with Orson Welles' work. So with Touch of Evil, you'll note that there are 3 versions available here on this edition. You have the reconstructed version, which is the version that most closely represents Orson Welles' vision that was put together in 1998. You have the theatrical version that was shown to theater goers in 1958. And then you have the preview version, and it says, created prior to the theatrical version, this cut of the film incorporates some of Welles' requests and was rediscovered by Universal in 1976. So this does include the reconstructed cut, which is based off of a memo that Orson Welles wrote to the studio when he saw the version that they showed in theaters. I think it was that version or the preview version. He wrote the studio a 58-page memo that said, look, these are the things that you need to do to make this film resemble the vision that I had for this film. I put a lot of work into making this film. Please make these changes. And he wrote a 58-page memo, and it's actually included in this edition here. And this memo is really, really phenomenal. So this is part of what I love about this edition, is that it does include this memo, because you get the actual notes from Orson Welles about the specific aspects of this film that he wanted changed so that it would represent the vision that he had set. And the note that he put at the very end is very telling. He just simply says, I close this memo with a very earnest plea that you consent to this brief visual pattern to which I gave so many long, hard days of work. So he's just saying, look, I put a lot of work in this film. The principal players and all the players involved and all the crew that was involved in this film, we worked very hard to put this film together. Please respect that work and put this film together in a way that represents my vision. So he never lived to see that. The reconstructed version took the notes from his memo and was created in 1998 after his death. And it is represented in these versions here and represented in the best it's ever looked in on this new 4K disc of Touch of Evil. So this is an amazing film. I love it. I highly recommend it. Was so excited when it was announced for 4K a few months ago. And this is gonna rank very high on many people's lists, like top 10 lists of the year. This is just a great addition, Touch of Evil. So love that film. Let me know in the comments below if you've seen Touch of Evil, if you have this edition from Kino Lorber, and what you think about it. And so the last feature I'm gonna talk about for this Taste of Orson Welles film. So this is Taste of Orson Welles, Taste of Director series. And this is a film that I really, really like. I love this film. I recently revisited it. And I love this film, F for Fake, is from 1975. And it's shot in a documentary style, like cinema verite type style. And it's basically Orson Welles. You see a lot of him. He is very much a star in this film. So it shows him in a documentary format, really just talking about fakery and talking about what's the difference between what's real and what's fake, whether it be in art or other areas of life. And this is just a fun film to watch that I highly, highly recommend, because you see so much of Orson Welles and you hear, things directly from the mouth of Orson Welles and how he sees the world and how he sees how art imitates life and just different aspects of what's real versus what's fake. So I'm gonna actually read the back here of the Criterion disc case here, because this summary really sums it up. It says F for Fake, trickery, deceit, magic. In F for Fake, a free-form sort of documentary by Orson Welles, the legendary filmmaker and self-described charlatan, gleefully re-engages with the central preoccupation of his career. The tenuous lines between illusion and truth, art and lies. Beginning with portraits of the world-renowned art forger Elmire de Horry and his equally devious biographer Clifford Irving, Welles embarks on a dizzying journey that simultaneously exposes and revels in fakery and fakers of all stripes, not the least of whom is Welles himself. Charming and inventive, F for Fake is an inspired prank and a clever examination of the essential duplicity of cinema. So this is a great addition. It's a very different type of film that I highly recommend. You really get to see the filmmaker himself. And that's one of my favorite parts of F for Fake and why I included it in this Taste of Director series. So it's from 1975 and just fantastic. These are the 4 films that I included in this Taste of Director series entry for Orson Welles: Citizen Kane, The Magnificent Ambersons, Touch of Evil, the recent Kino Lorber and the Universal Studios limited edition from a few years back, and of course F for Fake. So these are 4 phenomenal films from this amazing director. Let me know in the comments below, what are your favorite films from Orson Welles? What are your favorite films from Orson Welles? And what are some other examples or stories that you can think of where the studio messed with Mr. Welles' brilliant work? Let us know that in the comments below. A couple of other films I have from Mr. Orson Welles are in the Criterion collection as well, and they are both excellent, highly recommended editions. And these are editions that they come in the Spine 800 series of Criterion. So one is Spine number 830, which is Chimes Midnight, or Chimes at Midnight. Great film where he's playing Falstaff. But this is basically a Shakespearean story. So Orson Welles really admired Shakespeare. He liked to adapt Shakespeare's work in his plays, and I think is some of his best work is these Shakespearean plays. Chimes at Midnight is one of them. It comes in at Spine 830 in the Criterion collection, and it came out in 1966. And then also from 1952 and 1955, there's a couple of versions of this film. Spine number 870 is Othello. So this is Orson Welles doing Shakespeare's Othello. So I highly recommend checking this one out. Very good adaptation of Othello. So those are a couple of other films in Orson Welles' filmography that I would highly recommend. But let me know in the comments below, what are your favorite films from Orson Welles? Again, Orson Welles for me is one of my absolute favorite directors. I just love his work. I love his approach to filmmaking. I love, and didn't mention that, he started the Mercury Theater Company with John Houseman. And you'll notice in works like Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons, and I failed to mention this earlier and I apologize, but he used or worked with a lot of the Mercury Theater players like Joseph Cotton, like Agnes Moorhead, and several others in films like Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons. And I just loved seeing them. Of course, Agnes Moorhead for me, of course, is Endora from Bewitched. So, love to see her in those earlier film roles that she did 20 plus years before she did Bewitched. And of course, Joseph Cotton was just a phenomenal actor in the Mercury Theater circuit with Orson Welles. And actually, Joseph Cotton appears 30 years later in this documentary, F for Fake. So you do get to hear and see from Joseph Cotton in F for Fake as well. So that was a great part of Orson Welles' career, was translating his earlier days in the theater and cutting his teeth in the theater and bringing that experience to the silver screen. And I think it just translated incredibly well. And I think he did a great job with it. And I just I just hate that the studios messed with his work the way that they did, because there's so much of his work that we would probably be able to enjoy had it not been tampered with. But the good thing is the work that we do have from this great director is something that we can enjoy and pass on to future generations, or so to speak. And who knows, maybe some of that lost footage will at some point be found. You never know. But that's where I'll leave it on this Taste of Director series for Taste of Orson Welles films. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this series, and let me know what you think about future installments of this series. Of course, I did a recent post on my community poll asking for your feedback, and I'm very much looking forward to upcoming entries in this series. Of course, next month, in the month of April, the spotlight will turn to Ridley Scott, and then I'm very soon going to announce who the spotlight will be on in the months of May and June of 2022. But that's going to be as a result of the polls that many of you have participated in. So again, thank you for your feedback. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time at the movies. Peace.